Good afternoon, folks. We're gathered here at the Kansas Capitol building to release a little information that we think the citizens of Kansas ought to know about. If you're unacquainted with the Cox-Kettler trial in the city of Wichita in the Federal District Court, which occurred in November of this year, you will soon learn quite a bit about it. We're going to kick this off today with Jeremy Kettler. He has a statement he would like the citizens of Kansas to hear about and to know. Then Rob Wood will have a little bit to visit with us, and then I will tell you what it is that we have done as a direct result of the circumstances which recently occurred there in Wichita, and I'll tell you what I personally have done as a citizen of Kansas, willing and hoping to be found standing in defense of the rights of the citizens of this state and the balance of the United States. So without further delay, Mr. Kettler, come on up here and tell us what you've got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking the Kansas Chamber of Liberty for their support throughout the trial of myself and Mr. Cox. Patrick Henry once said, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to regulate the people. It is an instrument for the people to regulate the government, lest it come to dominate our lives and interests." It was in this very building that Kansas legislators passed SB 102 in April of 2013, nullifying firearms and accessories made, sold, and kept within Kansas borders, thereby not falling victim to federal interstate commerce clause. The National Firearms Act was established in 1934 to curb the rise of gangster violence common during that era. Federal legislators, knowing they couldn't outright ban firearms, basically tried to tax them out of circulation. The Supremacy Clause only applies to constitutional legislation. The Founding Fathers were very clear when they stated that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is the supreme law of the land. This begins with strong state leadership. That means our elected officials have to stand behind the laws that they pass. In short, Governor Brownback should be talking the same way now as he did to Eric Holder back in 2013. And Attorney General Derek Schmidt has released a press statement telling us what is not his job, to represent private individuals such as myself, but what he's failed to acknowledge is what is his job, and that's to prosecute the ATF agents who are clearly in violation of Kansas law as stated in SB 102. Alaska, Arizona, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, and Wyoming all have similar laws nullifying federal firearms regulations within the borders of their states. Medical marijuana has been legalized in over half of the 50 states. 8 states, including the capital of Washington, D.C., has legalized marijuana for recreational use. Yet in the eyes of the federal government, it's still classified as a Schedule I controlled substance right next to heroin, which means that it has no known medical uses and is highly addictive. These federal laws are obsolete and ineffective. Regardless of personal views on the item being regulated, it is essential to remember that the states and the people retain the right to make laws within their states and to fiercely protect their right to do so. This has resulted in the possibility for the establishment of sanctuary cities, the rights of same-sex couples to be married before 2015, and historic state efforts to undermine federal fugitive slave laws during the Civil War. These issues have to be important to everyone across the U.S. because as it stands, the government is telling us that state laws don't matter and that they can come into your state and arrest you for following state law. If the government's opinion of the states is true, why do we have state laws at all? Why does this building exist? And why do these people have jobs? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, we'll now hear from Mr. Rob Wood. He is a board member of the Kansas Chamber of Liberty and one of the founding members. He helped organize and establish the Kansas Chamber of Liberty, and we hope that hearing from him will enlighten you a little bit about what the Kansas Chamber of Liberty is and why that they're here. Rob? Rob, come on up.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to our Bill of Rights Day press conference. We are here today to stand with Jeremy Kettler, a veteran and Shane Cox, a father of a currently serving Marine, to defend their rights and demand that the state of Kansas stand up for Kansas law. The Kansas Chamber of Liberty organization stands for equal treatment under law, liberty and opportunity for all, and for restoring the principles of good government. We are here today because great injustice has been done to these Kansas citizens. We're here to support the rule of law and the rights of our neighbors and fellow citizens. Today is December 15th, National Bill of Rights Day. These declarations of our basic rights were made part of our Constitution on December 15th, 1791. The founders of this great union of states felt it was necessary to list those rights which governments and men cannot touch or violate, and those unalienable rights that were granted to us by our Creator. Today, we celebrate the Bill of Rights by exercising them during a time of extreme need. Specifically, those rights outlined in the 1st, 2nd, 9th, and 10th Amendment. Today, we are expressing our right to free speech, our right to free press, our right to peacefully assemble, and our right to petition our government for redress of grievances. All these are part of the critical First Amendment. It is interesting to note that a Kansas group did a survey of 500 Kansas citizens at a summer fair and found only 2% were able to name all 5 rights in the First Amendment. I've named 4 here today. Can you name the 5th? It is critical that if we are to remain a free state in a free country, that citizens know their rights and exercise them often. Because a right not exercised is a right soon lost. Today we are here in defense of the Second Amendment, which declares a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It cannot be any clearer that our right to bear arms cannot be infringed in any way by government, the government of Kansas, the government of the United States, or by any person. Today we are also here in defense of the 10th Amendment, which declares the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively and to the people. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, wrote in Federalist 45, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." The 10th Amendment makes it clear that our Declaration of Independence and in our Declaration of Independence that we are free, independent, and sovereign states who formed in union with the Constitution and gave a very small, limited central government powers to work for us on external objects or foreign affairs. Today it has grown into a central power more tyrannical and more intrusive from which we separated. Our rights are more threatened today than they have ever been. Our federal government has grown so large and so outside of its bounds in the limitations of the Constitution that it's trampling upon the states and the people every single day. As the states and the people stand up to reestablish the proper constitutional limits placed upon the federal government, they see the tyranny that's been waged on them by that government. Today in Kansas, we are witnessing clear violations of our rights, our liberty, and our sovereignty. Kansas stood up in 2013 and very clearly defined the boundaries of our right to bear arms and our state sovereignty when we passed the strongest state-level bill in modern American history, the Second Amendment Protection Act. It clearly supports the Bill of Rights, the U.S. and Kansas Constitution, and it boldly declares that any act, law, treaty, order, rule, or regulation of the government of the United States which violates the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States is null, void, and unenforceable in the state of Kansas. This Kansas statute put provisions in place to firmly protect the gun rights of the citizens of this state. A father of a currently serving Marine and a veteran followed that law to the letter and have been illegally arrested and tried and convicted for upholding Kansas law. This Kansas Second Amendment Protection Act passed by a huge bipartisan veto-proof majority in the Kansas House and Senate. It was put in place to protect the gun rights of Kansas citizens who buy, sell, manufacture made in Kansas firearms, accessories, and ammunition. The Kansas law has severe penalties for those who violate it. It is unlawful for any official, agent, or employee of a government of the United States or an employee of a corporation providing services to the government of the United States to enforce or attempt to enforce any act, law, treaty, order, rule, or regulation of the government of the United States regarding a firearm accessory, or ammunition that is manufactured commercially or privately owned in the state of Kansas and that remains within the borders of the state. A violation of this section is a severity level 10 non-person felony. Kansas law indicates that the state of Kansas will protect the citizens from illegal attempts by federal agents to interfere or arrest Kansas citizens for following the Kansas law. It specifically indicates that the county attorney, district attorney, and Kansas attorney general can file charges against federal agents in order to protect the rights of the citizens. Shane Cox and Jeremy Kettler were arrested over a year ago, and the county attorney, district attorney, and the Kansas attorney general have refused to follow Kansas law to file charges against the federal agents that publicly and knowingly broke Kansas law. The Kansas governor has refused to stand up and protect these men by making sure the laws of Kansas are faithfully executed and as constitutionally required of him in Article 1 of the Kansas Constitution. It states, "The supreme executive power of the state shall be vested in a governor, who shall be responsible for the enforcement of the laws of the state." The sheriffs and the Kansas law enforcement agencies have refused to enforce Kansas law and protect Kansas citizens. The entire system of Kansas law has been completely ignored, and those delegated with power to enforce them have failed us. The number one job of government in this country is to defend the rights of the citizen, and it is a primary duty of those who we elect to serve us in government and law enforcement. The first law on the books in this land, the Declaration of Independence, clearly spells out this solemn duty. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments were instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Today, men must stand and demand that our U.S. and Kansas constitutions and the laws of Kansas be followed. We must demand that those who serve us in government defend our rights and protect us from those who would violate them. The Bill of Rights Day must mark a turning point where the people will stand no more for violations of our rights and no more trampling of our liberty. Many men gave their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor so that we could be free. Today, our rights are more threatened by a central power than they were when we declared ourselves free, independent, and sovereign states, completely free of the tyrannical control of the state of Great Britain. On this Bill of Rights Day, we must declare our independence once more from tyranny and restore the rights and liberty of the people. Shortly after the Second Amendment Protection Act was signed into law by Governor Brownback, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder at the time sent a response letter indicating the states have no rights unless the federal government and their courts tell us we do. Governor Brownback sending back a firm letter indicating the right to keep and bear arms is a right that Kansans hold dear. It is a right enshrined not only in the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, but is also protected by the Kansas Bill of Rights. The people of Kansas have repeatedly and overwhelmingly reaffirmed their commitment to protecting this fundamental right. The people of Kansas are likewise committed to defending the sovereignty of the state of Kansas as guaranteed in the 9th and 10th Amendments to the United States Constitution. The people of Kansas have clearly expressed their sovereign will. These are great words, but when these Kansas citizens were arrested and came to the Kansas governor and to the Kansas Attorney General for protection in 2015 and 2016, they received no redress and no help. We stand here today boldly calling for our state governor and our Attorney General and others to defend these Kansas citizens and file charges against the federal agents that violated Kansas law, to protect them as required in the statute they signed into law in 2013. We stand here today and demand that the county sheriffs, police, state law enforcement agencies enforce the law and protect these men from further abuse. On this 225th anniversary of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, we call on all Kansans to stand with us today. We call on the free press to be unafraid to print our message with clarity and purpose. Because the rights you won't defend or express today will be the rights that are gone tomorrow. These issues are very serious, and there are very serious consequences for those that fail to follow Kansas law and fail to uphold their solemn obligation to the citizens of the state, to their oath of office, and their professional ethics in that regard. We have a citizen who will come speak and tell how serious the consequences are in these situations and to give you information on this. Geezer.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, folks. Most people that are acquainted with me know that I'm most commonly called Geezer. My proper name is Dale Chaffee. This morning, I filed complaints registered at the Office of the Disciplinary Administrator of the Kansas Supreme Court. I have right here in my hand the front copy. There's up here in the corner, you will see it is received, stamped received by the administrators, the Disciplinary Administration Office's proper official stamp. These complaints are very simple. There are rules of conduct which, when the public trust is vested in you, you are required to execute. We have a governor, we have as Rob very well has mentioned and articulated altogether well enough. The governor didn't do his job. The Attorney General did not do his job. There are 3 sheriffs who had the power to put a stop to this absolute miscarriage of justice which has been perpetrated upon Shane Cox and Jeremy Kettler. All they had to do was assert the power that they possess within their county. The sheriff of Allen County, the sheriff of Neosho County, and the Sedgwick County sheriff. The Sedgwick County sheriff had the full power to walk into that federal court and stop that proceeding in process. The federal court has no right to ignore Kansas law. The man sitting on the bench, the prosecutor, the federal district attorney, are all attorneys practicing under licenses issued by the state of Kansas. If they are willing to ignore Kansas law, then they are not entitled to that license, and it should be, it is likely to be a condition imposed upon them by the State of Kansas Supreme Court Disciplinary Administration. It is an absolute unequivocal outrage. There are things which must be done, and we can lay a lot of this at our own feet, we the citizens. We are absolutely persuaded, I am absolutely persuaded, that if we are unwilling to acknowledge our binding obligation to God to defend those things which He has given us, then we have no reason to believe that we're going to be able to keep them. Our obligation is not only to God, but to our fellow men. And in keeping the obligation, it's more than a right, it's an absolute duty. Back in 1643, Samuel Rutherford wrote something down that had perhaps been thought by many men, but I don't know that, to my knowledge, it was never written down by anyone else until that time. He talked about the power to govern men in all places on this planet. He said it's a very simple power, and it has but one source and but one flow. The power flows in only one direction, to a specific end. The power comes from God to the people, and by their consent to the people who assume the power of administrating civil government. Now, when you contemplate that, you say, well, my goodness, monarchies don't need the permission of the people. Want to bet? When monarchies become so despot and so contrary to the will of the people that rebellion occurs, they have only one course, and that is to remove the head of the king and replace him with someone who understands that he better pay a little bit of attention to the people. In this nation, God has given us a nation in which all power is vested in we the people. If we are unwilling to assert ourselves in the defense of those rights which God gave us, we have an absolute guarantee that they will be lost, because all government has a perpetual tendency to increase its own power at every opportunity, to disregard the power and opinion of the people, and to expand its capacity to collect money and give favors to various individuals that it deems to be worthy of a favor. We have the federal judge, the district attorney, the federal district attorney, the district attorney in Sedgwick County, the county attorneys in Neosho and Allen counties, the governor of the state of Kansas, and the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General has put out a thing that says he did something. Well, he did, he did do something. It is different than nothing. He consciously refused to give Chris Kobach the authority to intervene in the interest of Shane Cox and Jeremy Kettler. I believe that every citizen in this state needs to know that the very day the charges were levied against them, Mr. Kobach made formal request of the Attorney General to be allowed to act in intervention in the interest of the Constitution of Kansas, the laws of Kansas, the citizens of Kansas, and these two gentlemen in particular. It was refused. The Supreme Court now has in their hand a formal complaint regarding that behavior. Mr. Brownback had full knowledge that this violation, this felony violation of Kansas law had occurred, and it was very easy to find out who had done it. He did not call an emergency session of the legislature. He did not do anything detectable that there's been any proof that he did anything. If he did do anything, it's a completely hidden matter. He is obligated to defend the citizens of Kansas from the overreach. The federal government was created by the states. The federal government in its entirety serves at the pleasure of the states, and there is absolutely no excuse for a governor showing a governor and an attorney general having shown gross indifference to the citizens of the state of Kansas, gross indifference to the Constitution, to the laws, and to the fate of these two citizens. And I would tell you that, in my opinion, they have not only shown gross indifference and criminal negligence, they have accentuated that foul behavior with outright cowardice, period. The idea that the federal government, that we owe complete and total submission to federal government, is a disgraceful notion. The idea that the Supreme Court, which is part of federal government, is to be the final arbiter of what the perimeters of federal power are, is enough to it makes me ill. I have tried to imagine. I was at that trial. I saw what was done. I heard what that judge said. I heard what the prosecutor said, and it was an absolute revulsion to every sensitivity of any decent, God-fearing American that I could possibly imagine. In my youth, I elevated to very nearly an art form the use of profanity. But I want you to understand something today, that the most skillful use of profanity itself will not adequately express. There simply does not exist words that I am acquainted with in the English language that could describe the reality of the vile, disgusting proceeding I saw taking place in Wichita against these two men, putting their family through extraordinary stress. It was among the most disgusting things I have yet seen in the entirety of my life. And to think that it's being done by those vested with the public trucks, whose only purpose for receiving a check or for spending their time is to secure the rights of citizens, is enough it ought to disgust every one of us, and we must absolutely stand in defense of our rights, of these citizens, and call these people to task. I want to let you know that on January 11th, we will return here. We will do the best we can to discover what has been done as a result of these formal felony filings. If nothing has been done, the citizens of Kansas are going to have before them, in my estimation, a considerable dilemma. Is it possible that we're going to tolerate a governor and lawyers practicing in our courts who absolutely ignore the laws which are clearly supported by the vast majority of our citizenry? If we're going to do that, friends, we are making a terrible mistake. It is a guarantee we will lose these rights. I'm going to close my statement right now. We have the Fifth Amendment, the Fifth Annual 10th Amendment dinner will be held on January 11th also at the Capitol Plaza Hotel. And I must conclude with something an observation. On Monday of this week, we sent out notices to 263 different press outlets. And what we have actually ended up doing is having a wonderful studio for a YouTube video, basically, because not one single press component is here to report a single thing about what is transpiring, which I suspect has something to do with their regard for the wisdom and good sense of the citizens whom they pretend to serve. Thank you. If you've watched this, thank you very much. The Chamber of Liberty, I believe, is a fine organization. The actions taken here and the words that I have spoken from this podium are my words. The action that is taken against these individuals are my actions. And it is a thing, if your business is being approached with a regulation that might, as has happened to Shane Cox, he's bankrupt. He has not been, his business is locked up, he can't even walk on the property. The Chamber of Liberty is the only organization I know that will come to your aid as rapidly as we possibly can and as effectively as we possibly can. Please join us on the 11th. Come out and hear Chris Ann Hall at at the 10th Amendment dinner. And then, last but not least, on February 6th, it is the day that the sentencing is to occur for these two men. And let it be completely understood that if they were sentenced to 1 day of home arrest, that's 1 day too many. If this is not entirely expunged from their record, it is not adequate. These charges should never have been brought. Shall not be infringed means precisely what it says. The federal government doesn't have a right to regulate, it doesn't have a right to tax, it doesn't have a right to even offer an opinion on what we, the citizens of the United States of America and the state of Kansas, do with anything that resembles a firearm. And that's the end of that story, and it is not rocket science. We must stand up for it, and we must do it now. This country is in a heck of a shape. Mr. Trump, I hope you get the swamp drained. Out here in Kansas, we're thinking real serious about setting this prairie on fire. Thank you, folks.
Thank you for coming today. I just wanted to make some final closing comments. We are going to be back here on January 11th, 1 o'clock, here in the Statehouse. We'll see what happens. See what comes about of these charges that have been put together, about our words from here today. I challenge every Kansas citizen, get here. Get here. Also, come to our 5th annual 10th Amendment dinner. Contact your veterans groups. Talk to them. They need to stand with their fellow veterans. And this time, today, freedom is being destroyed in our own country, and we need their help to help us restore it. Thank you for being here today with us.